Good morning. All right, we'll go ahead and kind of get started here. I know you're excited because it is, after all, Leviticus. Everybody's excited about Leviticus. I mentioned this briefly last week, and I just want to mention it again. It's probably just due to the fact that it's more me than anything else. Leviticus is a tough book, number one, to read, right? And I still find it odd that at least what I gathered is that for young Jewish children in synagogue school, this is the first book they're taught. To me, this just seems really strange. But it's quite important. And it's difficult to read through it, and it's difficult on my end as we think about teaching it, because there's so much stuff. And there's so much stuff of going, okay, what do we need to stop and look at? What do we not need to stop and look at? And so we're taking this in big sections. Last week, as we got ready to leave, we just read through very quickly the food laws from Leviticus chapter 11. We're not going to reread that, so just breathe easy. And as a matter of fact, we're going to read precious little between, actually we're not going to read much of anything between chapters 12 all the way up to chapter 16. And here's the reason. One is you don't need me to read it to you. And two is that it's incredible. There's just a lot there that I think we can sum up. So it seems like there's a couple of things that when we talk about this new way of being God's people that they're dealing with is the first section here is going to talk about cleanliness, chapter 11 through 15. Cleanliness, purity might be another way of looking at it in that way, but it has more to do with ritual cleanliness or ceremonial cleanliness. And so sometimes we get things, I don't want us to get things confused. If you read through, chapter 11, of course, is the food laws, and we've got a handle on that. And then you move into chapter 12, and chapter 12 talks primarily about childbirth. And then we get into bodily discharges of all kinds, which is always fun to read. And then an enormous amount of literature on leprosy, or what it may or may not be, right? And so we see these things and we go, and sometimes we will automatically equate uncleanness or impurity, depending on your translation, and sin. And that's not the case, right? Especially when we start thinking about, as fun as it is to talk about bodily discharges, right? That's not a sin. For a woman to have a menstrual cycle is not a sin. It's just there's an uncleanness that comes with it, and it has more to do with the health of the community and the benefit of the woman than it does, right? Of going, oh well, that's a sin. That seems strange to me. So what I want us to do, at least for this section, is I want us to think of those chapters 11 through 15 as kind of primarily what we'd think about ritual cleanliness versus impurity. And I really think, and I may be dead wrong, I hope I'm not, but I may be wrong, but a lot of this has to do with the physical health of Israel. Okay? I mentioned this last week briefly. I think it was Patrick Mead, as a matter of fact. And if you listen to Patrick Mead or read some of his stuff There's a lot of things to disagree about with Patrick Mead. But with this section, one of the things that he says, and he does this so well, is that the danger for Israel on the way from Sinai to inhabit the land of Canaan, health is far more dangerous than an enemy. They're more likely to die from disease than they are from enemy attack. And so all of these things that God is putting in place for them and is talking to them about really has to do with their health. I mean, it really has to do with them being the people that they're supposed to be, but keeping disease out of the camp. All right? And so we have that section on that type of purity, and then we're going to shift gears. We're going to move all the way to chapter 18. Right? So we are going to do some reading here. Chapter 18, where now we're going to start talking about not just not ritual uncleanness, but now actually moral sin. Okay? And we're going to deal with these, and it's a big section. Chapters 18 through 20. And we're going to deal with a lot of the things in there and see if we can't we're going to do our best to make a big point out of this toward the end. All right? So here we go. Chapter 18. The Lord spoke to Moses. This is the first 5 verses, what I want to look at for right now. The first 5 verses. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt where you lived, and you shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan to which I'm bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. You shall follow my rules, keep my statutes, walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my rules. If a person does them, he will live by them. I am the Lord. I am Yahweh." This next section from verse 6 down to verse 24 is all about sexual ethics. Okay? And there's all kinds of stuff in there. We can read it if you like, but there's all kinds of things in there. It starts with, it talks about incest. And it will talk about adultery. And it will talk about bestiality. And it will talk about homosexuality. And it's all this stuff. It's all right there for us to see. And you get to verse 24, and you hear it again. "Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, for by all these things the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean. The land has become unclean, and the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall keep my statutes and my rules. Do none of these abominations, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you, for the people of the land who were before you did all these abominations, so that the land became unclean, lest the land vomit you out when you make it unclean, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. For everyone who does any of these abominations, the persons who do them shall be cut off from among their people. Keep my charge to never practice any of these abominable customs that were practiced before you, and never make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God." Okay, so I think as we take a look at this, and when we read through that section, verse 6 through verse 23 of chapter 18, we see all kinds of what we would rightly say, I think. We would rightly say deviant sexual behavior, right? And just going, this is outlandish. But I want us to notice that this is what's going on around them, or certainly seems that way. It starts in chapter 18, verses 1 through 5. You do not do the way they did in Egypt that I just brought you out of, and you do not do the way that they do in Canaan where I'm taking you. Because apparently this is what's going on. And Israel is to be none of that. And at the end, He mentions it again. I don't really know what to make of this phrase, but it's fun to think about. And that is that the land has become unclean because of them, and the land will vomit them out. It's mentioned in there a couple of times. And I think there's a tie-in to this, and we're going to get to that toward the end of this. But what I want us to think about is this idea of the different kind of people that they're supposed to be. Completely different from where they came from, and completely different from the people to whom they're going. Now, this let's do this. This is a, how do I word it? Disgusting yet fun section of Scripture. How about that? Can we say it that way? Right? It's disgusting when you read about it, but it's fun for us because we go, see? And we kind of get smug, right? When we start talking about this stuff, going, see, we don't do any of that. We don't behave that way. This isn't who we are. And we're really, really good on, and we pay close attention to this because there's various punishments. There are really two main punishments that we find. One is death, and the other one is to be cut off from among your people, and we'll talk about those in a minute too. But because those are different. And when we think about the culture around us, and we see what we would say, and I believe what we would see from Scripture, is deviant sexual ethics around us, and we go, see, look at it. But the problem is that we like this section of Scripture because we can feel good about it, but he's not done, and that's the problem. He's not done because he doesn't end here, because there's more to it. Chapter 19. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father. You shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves any gods of cast metal. I am the Lord your God. Now, in case we've missed that, I think if we look really closely, and then we don't even have to look and get too deep in it, we have the first of the commandments are right there. Not said the way that they are in Exodus 20 or in Deuteronomy chapter 5, but here they are again. I am the Lord your God. I'm the one who brought you out of Egypt. It's a prohibition against idolatry, honoring father and mother, keeping the Sabbaths, right? These kinds of things that are all wrapped up here. When you offer a sacrifice of peace offerings to the Lord, offer it so that you may be accepted. It'll be eaten the same day you offered. On the day after, anything left over until the third day shall be burned up with fire. If it's eaten at all on the third day, it's tainted. It will not be accepted. Everyone who eats it will bear his iniquity because he has profaned what is holy to the Lord, and that person will be cut off from among his people. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edges. Neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. And you shall not strip your vineyard bare. Neither shall you gather fallen grapes from your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. You shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. You shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God, because I am the Lord. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until morning. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear the Lord, you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we can feel pretty good we can feel pretty good about that section in chapter 18, right? Now we're going, hey, that's not us, right? That's not us. It seems strange to have to say this, but going obviously we are against and would be opposed at incest and bestiality and adultery and homosexuality and all of those deviant things that we find in there. Going, yeah, that's not us. And you're going, okay, look at us go, but it's not. He's not done. Now he starts getting personal now, because now it's not just about. I'm trying to remember who said this. I think it was Randy Harris who said this, that a lot of times when we start thinking about sin and the grievous sins that do us harm, and the grievous sins that we ought to stand against, that it's particularly below the belt, is what he would say. And it's not. Because there's enough here to also get us. When you reap your fields, you don't reap all of it. I think it's going to rain. I don't know. Instead, you leave it. You leave some. When you pick your vineyards, you leave some. You look out for one another. Right? You don't steal, you don't lie. Right, again, right from the Ten Commandments. Or swear by my name falsely. You don't oppress your neighbor or rob him. We go, of course you don't oppress your neighbor or rob him. But then if we look and we think, if we tie these things together, it goes, and you also don't withhold the wages of somebody who works for you, because that is, I wonder if that's considered oppression and robbery. These old statutes that we find have so much relevance that sometimes we miss it. There's a friend of mine was telling this story years ago, that he and his neighbor were doing some work in their respective yards, and they were going to work on a section of fence. Neither one of them really had time to do it, but they were going to get the materials and they were going to hire somebody to do it. And he just said, he goes, and so my neighbor said, I tell you what, if we go down and we get some temporary workers, and he was thinking that if we get some Hispanics to come and do this, we don't have to pay them as much. And I said, really? And he goes, yeah. He goes, what would be the harm in that? And he goes, and what came to mind was Leviticus. Huh? You don't withhold their wages. You pay them what you would anybody else. You don't rob or oppress your neighbor, whether it is the native born or the sojourner who's among you. Now this gets really ticklish, doesn't it? And I got to tell you, these kind of things here that we find, they really make us stop and think when we read them. I don't know. I wish I did. I wish I had the answer. But I don't know if anybody's noticed this or not. But there seems to be a little tension in the country today about who's here and who's not, about who belongs here in the United States and who doesn't. I do not have the answer to that question. You can ask me all you want to, and it's still going to be the same. I don't really know. I really don't know how this all shakes out. There's so many things. But I think that we need to be very thoughtful, and I think we need to be very careful about how it is that we approach the subject as people who serve Jesus. There's a lot of things in play. But it seems to me that what it is that God's driving at here is this idea of you're going to be different than the people around you. The prevailing culture does not dictate how we behave. I think it makes that very, very clear in those two bookends of that section in chapter 18. We're going, this is where you were, and this is where I'm taking you. But you're not like either one of those. You're mine. And to be mine, you're different. To be mine means that you have to, everything about you will change. And that's hard. Hey, think about this if we maybe make a big strokes here real quick. Chapter 11 is about what we eat, or about what they eat. But I think same could be said. 12 through 15 all has to do with general, I think a lot with general health and paying attention to one another, right? So that the community itself is healthy. 18 deals with sex drives. Now I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe eating and drinking and sex are the survival instincts that we have. Wouldn't you say? I mean, they're kind of necessary to survival and to continuation of the species. Am I wrong? Okay. The most basic drives that we have. How about that? Hunger, thirst, sex. And all of those most basic drives are put under the control of God as to what you can eat, your sexual ethics, right? The most basic drives go under Him. Even, if we caught it, it's just barely mentioned in here, but if we caught it, even this idea of work and rest and life and balance, everything goes underneath Him, our most basic drives. And then, if that's not enough, then also our other, I don't think these are most basic drives, but one of our most basic instinct, and that is that I take care of me. And that gets put under Him too. To where it's not, how much can I get out of this field, but how much do I need to survive and still be able to provide for the sojourner and the poor who's among them? It's not about me lying to get an advantage. Why? So, I think we've done this before. Why do we lie? And just selfishness, right? It's self-preservation, right? Now, none of you did this, but I did, right? That, and it's got to be funny. I wish there were, I say sometimes I wish there were, I'm glad there are not, videos of when I was younger. But of mom and dad asking me a question that they knew the answer to, and me lying about it. And I'm sure none of you ever did that, right? But I did. So you can think less of me if you want. But, and the number of, and the mental gymnastics that has to be done to try to make this all sound reasonable, it's got to be funny. You know, it really has to be funny to watch them, you know, to ask me the questions that they already knew. But you lie. You lie because I don't want to get in trouble. Or I lie to gain an advantage. I lie for self-preservation. Which all comes back to, I'm going to take care of me first. And so maybe all of our basic instincts that we've been that we've been taught or we have now have to be shifted and put under the control of the God who saved us. I hope we pick that up too, because he repeats that often. I am the Lord your God, right? I am the one who's delivered you. I'm the one who's setting the rules. And again, God's not setting the rules just so he can see if we'll do it. God's setting the rules for a particular reason. And if my instincts are right here on this, it is because the laws that are set and the statutes given that he keeps harping on, right? And he does. He just keeps harping on this. You're going to listen to me. You're going to do whatever I said. I mean, he just keeps going. And with the threat of punishment and all of the things that go with it, is to reset us, is to reset Israel back to humanity the way it was created. Right? That he's shooting for something else. That it is a reset to before the fall. Because the fall is a result of that instinct of, I'm going to take care of me. And I'm trying to get that back. I want humanity done right. And it's no wonder that Israel is not going to look like the people of Egypt, and that they're not going to look like the people that are in Canaan. And there's all kinds of strange things that we'll read here in Leviticus. There's all kinds of things about you're not going to, about the way they trim their beard, about cuts and about tattoos and about all kinds of things in there. And so I don't think that we walk down the street of Bentonville and go, you have a tattoo, you're going straight to hell, right? That's not the point. The point is, this is the practice of the people there, and you're not going to look like them, and you're not going to act like them. And you're going to be really strange. You're going to be really strange people. But the truth of the matter is that the world has been turned upside down because of sin, to where sin looks normal now. And now when you come back and you live the way that I've designed you, you're going to look weird. And some things never change, right? We look weird, or we're supposed to, right? That these laws about how it is that God's going to be able to live among the people of Israel has as much to do with one is their safety in having a holy God in their midst, and the other one is their purpose. This is to form them into people who, when they get to Canaan, that God's going to drive out the other nations and he's going to settle Israel here. A little piece of ground, by the way, that's still fought over today. But it was incredibly important in that part of the world, because it's at the intersection of everything. Right? This was kind of the intersection of the world. That everybody has to come through there. Because you can't, traveling across the desert, is going to be very, very difficult. It's hard to skirt that place, so you're going to be here. And so what it is going to be that Israel is going to set here as the example of this is what humanity is supposed to look like. There's a lot of things that could be said about the sexual ethic of Israel. One is that it is in line with the design that God had in the beginning. Right? Of going, if you'll just listen to me, if you'll just honor this, things will go the way that they're supposed to go. But not just that, because when sexual ethics get distorted, people get hurt. Right? the strong begin to prey on the weak, damage really gets done. And that's not what he intended. And then we move on into how it is that you treat the people who are with you and the people that you encounter. I said I'd get to this. I'm going to get to this really quick, and then we're going to move relatively quickly. Punishments. I do want to call this out because there are two different punishments, maybe three, depending on how you read one of them. But there are two different punishments that are given. One is death. Right? You shall put to death this person. And it's 18 is a good place to find some of this. I'm sorry. I was wrong. 20. Adultery, both parties are put to death. I mean, all kinds of things, and it'll say put to death. And then there's another one that's called cut off from your people. And they are not the same thing. They're not. There's some debate over what this means. But I think at least this much I think we can determine fairly easy. The punishment of death is carried out by Israel, by the people. Being cut off from your people is carried out by God. Okay? There's one section, and that is the sacrificing your children to Molech, which that's horrific in itself, and which carries both penalties, I believe. That if someone is guilty of sacrificing their children to Molech, they're put to death, and God cuts them off from their people. So, being cut off from your people. I mentioned a guy last week, I think, named Jacob Milgram. Milgram has written a lot of commentaries on Leviticus, who says this is a separation of you from your family, right, cut off from among your people, in the afterlife. Okay, maybe, but I think one of the things that as you read through the Old Testament in particular, there is what the ancient Israelites thought of the afterlife is a little bit fuzzy. I don't really know that they think in terms of the way we think of the afterlife now, and especially after the coming of Jesus, the difference that makes. So, while I appreciate Milgram and a lot of things that he says, I don't know that I buy that one. The way that Israel tends to think, or at least as you read through the Old Testament, some of the things that you find, leads me to think that what Israel thinks of the way that you live on after your death is through your family line, right? Genealogies are incredibly important. That you're tied back into the family of Abraham. And it seems, in this case, that God says you'll be cut off from your people, is that you will no longer be remembered in Israel, that your line will be gone. And I wonder, because just the way it's said, I wonder which one they feared most. How about that? I wondered if they feared being put to death more, or if they feared being cut off from among their people. And I have a feeling, and it's just a feeling, that it was probably split, but I would say that a great number of them were more concerned about being cut off from among their people. That their names and their family line would no longer be remembered and would no longer be participants in what God's doing. But I think one of the things that we notice, or I hope that we notice, is this. Is that it seems to me that God is incredibly serious about this. Anybody else with me on that? This is not, right, this is not, well, it's going to be okay, or, whatever the penance might be for this. No, it's very, very serious. And I think, as related to what we talked about last week with Nadab and Abihu, the seriousness is for the people of Israel, for their survival, but for a purpose that they're involved in that's way down the line, that they don't know about yet, that they don't understand yet. If Israel, right? If Israel doesn't live into her purpose, if Israel just becomes like any of the rest of the nations, then what is it that happens in the future? Does that make some kind of sense? That God is very, very particular about this, not just for Israel's sake, but for Israel's sake and the world's sake around Israel, and the world's sake of what's going to happen through Israel. So, said all that to say this. Jesus says, I did not come to abolish the law and the prophets. I did not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For as I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will disappear from the law until all things are accomplished. And he follows that up, the best I remember, with, and unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will by no means enter the kingdom. Now that's a mouthful. But what Jesus is doing, and as he launches in from chapter 5 and goes on into that section of, this is what you've heard, and this is what I'm telling you, is what we see is what the intent of the law was supposed to be. And what we see is that lived out in Jesus. Is that the intent of the law was not just to keep Israel from oppressing their neighbor, not just to keep Israel from engaging in illicit sexual acts. It's not just to keep Israel from eating the wrong things, or, it was to change them into different people. And so as old and as ancient and as weird, okay, as we find some of these old things in Leviticus, one thing that I hope we don't lose is that the commands that God gives us are meant to change us, are meant to change who we are. It's meant to change us into people who are not so much worried about, I'm trying to say this well, we're not so much worried about the punishment. Okay, that's not the only thing that keeps us from doing the things that we shouldn't do, or pushes us to do the things that we ought to, that we're afraid of the punishment. But it's meant for us to move away from that line and move more toward the people of God, because he's not done. Just as he cares for Israel and the way that Israel behaves, not just for her own sake, but for the sake of the others that are coming behind her. For the sake of the purpose of Israel in the world, the same as he's concerned for us. Not just for us, but for the ones who come behind us. Because he's not finished yet. It's not all about us. But it is about us becoming the people that carry this message forward. And that as we do this, and we do this together, and we look weird in the culture around us. I hope we do. I mean, we should. Just because we should be almost diametrically opposed to the direction the culture goes. But that what we see is people who, what these laws are designed for, and I'm almost out of time, right? What these laws are designed to be, people who transform us into the people who love the God who delivered them and who love their neighbor as their self. Because that's the bottom line of these sections. And there it is. Just when you thought it would never end, there goes the bell. Let's have a prayer. Father, we love you. We are thankful for the commands and the statutes and the instructions that you give us. Sometimes it makes things hard. Sometimes it makes life difficult. It makes us have to stop and think about the way we react to the world around us. And whether or not, and sometimes, frankly, where our loyalties lie. We thank you for rescuing us. And we thank you for being among us. And what we want most of all is to be called your people. We're thankful for the Spirit that you've given us to help transform us into the people that you've created us to be, and that we're attentive to that and attentive to your purpose for the world around us and for those who will come after us. That more will know who you are, and the more will learn of you, the God of Israel, and his dear Son, and in whose name we pray. Amen.